Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about the complete story of the Children of the Vault miniseries, written by Deniz. But before we dive into the story, I want to ask you a favor. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment to help the channel grow. So with that said, this issue opens at the vault located in Ecuador after the events of the Hellfire Gala. Now the way this issue starts is by following a timeline. And on this timeline, we get to see moment-by-moment play-by-play on Forge's system failing. At 22:41 on July the 26th, all systems appear normal, but the machine is already beginning to fail. For Krakoa has fallen and the mutants are dead with it. But still, the dream holds. The next morning at 7:12, one of the figures inside the machine begins to stir as error signals appear with alarms and warnings, but there is no one to hear them. But still the dream holds. At 10:38, logic gates rust permanently shut as the root of the system withers. And inside the simulation world of the machine, the sky flickered like a broken screen, the city boiled, and life no longer resembled reality. But still, the dream holds. At 19:32 that evening, the machine convulses once, twice, 3 times, and then the machine ultimately dies and the dream ends along with it. And just 1 minute later, the children of the vault are born back into the world they thought was already theirs. Now, Serafina 187 is the first to gather herself, and within the speed of light, all the machines on Earth catches her up to speed and fill her in on everything. Now this left the children of the vault upset about their accomplishments being null and void, for the mutants used their dreams as their personal prisons. But with the digital info dump, Serafina informs the others about the fall of Krakoa. For the dream is over and they are finally free at last. And the first thing they must do is return to the vault and inform their city of the current events. Because from the children of the vault's perspective, defeating mutantkind was their sole purpose of being, but with them gone, the reason for them hiding for so long and constantly improving themselves just doesn't make sense anymore. So with their biggest enemies gone, we transition sometime later in northern Chile, where we see a poor kid by the name Rodrigo walking alone in lithium-filled water. For his life was filled with hardships which included the murder of his mother and the exploitation of his homeland for the benefit of foreign nations. For the big corporations mined and extracted the lithium to create cell phones without caring about the impact it would have on the native land. But due to the pressures of life and the struggle for survival, Rodrigo did the unthinkable and proceeded to gulp down the poisoned water and continued to think of his mother as he stared at his phone. But at that moment something crazy happened, for in the reflection of his phone sat the children of the Vault Flying City in all its glory. For they are done hiding and are ready to reveal themselves to the world. So with that going down, we jump over to a captive Cable, who is currently being held at an Orchis Black Brain psychic interrogation site located on the outside of Washington, D.C. So as a mind flayer burrows into his neocortex, Cable's only conscious thoughts were, what is. Now this phrase is holy words where he is from, and like any good holy words, they can mean many things to many people. So to Cable, right now, they mean you must accept what you can't change, and change what you can't accept. And as for how they caught him sleeping, and just so you know, when I use the term sleeping, I don't mean literally, for Cable hasn't slept in years. But anyway, Orchis had surprised him on his ship, a ship that is probably disassembled on the floor of an Orchis hangar somewhere, along with his favorite arm and anything else they could get their hands on. And just for the record, Cable really loved that arm. So for over a month now, Orchis have been torturing him with everything they got. They started with cutting-edge science, using S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Patriot probes, Strike's psychic scalps, and they even used a form of talk therapy that was developed by Dr. Faustus. And when those didn't work, they just went back to that all-time classic pain. Now the reason why they want him so badly is because Orchis wants his secrets. They want to know everything he knows about the past, present, and especially the future. So as they was hard at work studying him, he in return was secretly doing the same while within a bubble that is thought impermeable and designed to hold an Xavier level telepath indefinitely. But the crazy part about this situation is no matter how much security they had on him, he was said to be able to break out and escape within 3 days if left on his own. But luckily for him, he didn't have to wait that long, for things move fast and a lot can happen in 3 days. Because out of nowhere an explosion set him free in front of several Orchis soldiers, but before they could open fire on him, a familiar kinetic blast blindsides them, sending them flying away. So with Cable standing in shock, Bishop emerged from the doorway with energy still radiating from his hand. So with yet another refugee from the future on the scene, both men have had a long and bloody history together in the far future. And if Cable was being completely truthful with himself, he would have rather accepted help from Apocalypse. So as the two dash down the hallway, they come across yet another attachment of Orchis troops, but this time Cable has a plan. For he tells Bishop to stop and wait, because, within the brief moment, Cable used his psychic power to convince them that they were Krakoan spies who were ready to die for the cause. Which was exactly what they did, for the Orchis soldiers fought tooth and nail to protect the two mutants. So as they continue to make their way down the hallway, Cable once again brings up how they got his favorite arm. Which Bishop replies to his comment by saying we're not going back for it. But see, Cable never had any intention to go back for it, for the arm exploded and took the base with it. So as the fight moves outdoors, only one mutant Orchis soldier will be captured alive. So Orchis psychiatrists will try but ultimately be unable to convince him that he is a victim of mind control. And later on that night, he will escape his holding cell and run to the roof in an attempt to use his mutant power of flight, but unfortunately, the 10-story fall will break most of his bones and collapse both lungs. So as he lay dying, his last wish was to be buried among his people on Krakoa. And as you may have assumed, that was not honored. So as Bishop and Cable gun it down the road, Cable takes a look into Bishop's mind only to find out about the events that took place during the gala. So with Krakoa and its gates off the table, Cable informs Bishop that he has a spot nearby where they can regroup. So with the two time travelers regrouping, we skip over to the children of the vault introducing themselves to the world as the children of tomorrow. And they tell the people of Earth that they bring a message that they will deliver in every language, for their gifts are for everyone. So they go on to say, when their ancestors left, they understood that mankind was on the road to self-destruction, that they needed answers faster than they could hope to find them. So to get those answers, they locked themselves away in a place where time moves faster. Though only a few decades passed for humans on the outside, their society on the inside has progressed to tens of thousands of years. And during that time, war, ecological catastrophe, diseases, prejudice, property, and pain have been solved, for those are the stuff of ancient history and were solved generations ago, and they wish to share their solutions with all freely. She then goes on to say their ancestors left so that, one day in the future they might return to save the past. And that day is today, for the future is here. And their message is simple: leave the past behind and become the future. Now the message was spread among those who are most in need to hear it, starting with the poorest places on Earth. And the way they did it was by deploying self-replicating technology 10,000 years ahead of its time, and those machines unfolded and integrated themselves, and started to consume and convert the already existing architecture as raw materials, to create brand new elements overnight, which redesigned the skyline and changed the night skies. The technology was so far advanced that the people within them called it Tomorrowtowns. And some of the things it had within those cities were machines to heal wounds and extend their lifespans, machines that extend their minds, machines that could rearrange rocks into food to eat, machines to strain together oxygen and hydrogen atoms to create lakes from deserts, machines that grant your every wish, machines made of imagination, and even machines that could even dream for you. So with all these accomplishments within a short period of time, the fame given to the children of tomorrow grew rapidly. Now, the children of tomorrow didn't just bring machines to gain favor with the people of today, but they also brought deeds. So when a tsunami threatened the Philippines Islands, Capitan arrived on the scene and hit the Pacific Ocean until it stopped moving. Following that, when an earthquake struck the Turkish city, Prisa was already moving everywhere. And at just under light speed, she evaluated all 43,000 residents one by one before the buildings even began to fall. But see, even with all these deeds, at first the government wanted to punish them for violations against their sovereign territories. One such time was in Queensland after Pharaoh stops a 40-mile-wide wildfire. The Australian Air Force attempted to interfere. But due to the children's ability to get things done and public opinion being on their side, the government couldn't do much. So just like that, tales of their victories spread along with their message. So eventually the children of tomorrow grew into such a big problem for the world leaders to solve, so for the first time, they decided to do nothing. Even Orchis, high on victory and paranoia, refused to confront them, and in internal meetings decided the children are a secondary concern that they will observe only. For they must finish what they started with the mutants. And in just a month, the whole world became a different place. So with everything changing, we skip over to Hell's Kitchen with Bishop and Cable walking down the street talking about how they are surprised the cities are still standing. Because when they first crossed paths, the children were dead set on world domination, but now it is like they are rebranding their image. And for a brief moment when Bishop heard them speak, he wanted to believe them, which was strange because Bishop never gives people the benefit of the doubt because they must earn it. So with speculation rising within our heroes, Bishop brings up how he believes they are most likely messing with their minds somehow. So with that out there, the two make their way to a storefront, which was a cover for Cable's storehouse. And in that storehouse was everything Bishop would have needed to wage war. For Bishop imagines what he could have accomplished if he'd known about this place before. For over the last month, he's been fighting a war with nothing but the clothes on his back and what he could steal. Because to him, all that matters is the list. Because during the day, he slept under bridges and in the basements of condemned buildings, pretty much places no one would think to look for him at. But when night falls, that is when he moves. And thus far during his crusade, he managed to hit 8 Orchis facilities in the last month, targeting mostly supply depots and 1 research lab. But despite how many targets he hits, he is still far from accomplishing his goals, for there were 1,743 Orchis facilities on his list, from space stations to strip malls. Because Bishop's aim was to burn every one of them to the ground, even if it takes him to the end of time. But in order to get to the list, the situation with the children would have to be dealt with, and Bishop had to admit he couldn't deal with it alone. For it was 1 versus 1 million, so, of course, he needed help. Now Cable wouldn't have been his first choice, but Bishop was used to no good choices. Because they would never really trust each other. Because in the past they had a misunderstanding and went to war over it. Now, Bishop had done things he wasn't too proud of, but he thought his reasons were good enough, but he was wrong. Some things can't be forgiven, but whatever they are to each other, they're both still mutants. So as the two were looking at each other, Cable tells him that he was looking at his mind, and if someone had been in there, then they were immaculate. Because they didn't even leave a fingerprint in any of the usual places, with no obvious signs of tampering. But after looking further into his mind, Cable did manage to see a spot on his mind. And whatever it was, it seems to be growing. Because somehow, some way the children were able to infect him with a virus, and since Cable now knows where it is located, it is pretty obvious looking back at it. And if all the telepaths weren't dead after the gala, then someone would have caught it before. So with that information out there, Bishop asks if he should wear a hazmat suit considering he is infected. But Cable reassures him that the virus doesn't spread in that way. Because the infection does spread from person to person, but it moves more like how an idea would spread. Because this kind of tech we're talking about is some high-level semiotic engineering. And when it comes to stopping it, that is harder said than done. Because plagues are notoriously difficult to control, but ideas are even more so. So with that said, this issue of Children of the Vault comes to an end. So with issue number 1 closing out, we jump over to issue number 2. So with that said, this issue opens up with Martillo standing in a parking lot outside a nightclub in Argentina. And while he is there, we get a dialogue from a narrator explaining how Martillo likes to peer through the walls to see the dancers inside. Now, this isn't the first time he has done this, for he comes here every night to watch them while he still can. So the reason why he does this is because music isn't allowed in the city with the exception of the military march. Because displays such as this are considered primitive and shameful, for the Children of the Vault doesn't dance. Of course, they have other more productive pleasures, but none of them makes him feel what he feels right now. So he commits every step, every significant look, and every stolen kiss to his memory. For soon, memories will be all that is left of dancing. But if he was honest with himself, just once, he'd really like to lay his hammer down and join them. But there's always something else that needs hitting. So with that said, out of nowhere, both Cable and Bishop ambushed Martillo with guns of blazing, which was a surprise for the Child of Tomorrow, because for some reason, he was under the impression that all the mutants were dead following the gala. So with Bishop being smashed into a parked car, Cable took the next man up mentality and engaged the enemy. So with Martillo distracted by Cable, Bishop was able to recover and blast him directly in the back. So with no time to waste, Bishop held down the target as Cable finished him off by knocking him out with a face shot. So with Martillo out cold, Cable proceeded to body slide the 3 to a safe location. So with the grab and dash being successful, we transition over to the current state of the world. And high above the clouds in their sentinel cities, the Children of Tomorrow look down on a world more familiar by the day. For these tomorrow towns provided self-replicating solutions to all life's problems across every continent, making good of men and at last, bringing the future to those left behind by it. And where bigger problems present themselves, the children get involved directly. Like when Port-au-Prince was invaded by an army of undead Avengers from Earth 2149, the children were there staring into the unhinged jaws of a corrupted Captain America. The people pray to God for salvation, but it's Atomo who answers. For all over the city, the living and the dead feel electron shifts in their orbits, molecules split apart and recombine as material reality itself is reshaped by Atomo's will. Now, Atomo rejects the separation between states. Stones become steam, matter becomes energy, fear becomes joy, and death becomes life. And when a radical Shi'ar faction bent on destroying planet Earth attacks Nairobi with a battalion of brainwashed super guardians, the children take up the defense. Until today, Elijah didn't have an opinion on the children of tomorrow. For he had more important things to think about, like providing for his wife and 2 daughters. But today, if not for the children, he would have lost his family to incomprehensible alien politics if it wasn't for the children of tomorrow. But see, that was just the start of their actions, for the children are everywhere, stopping attacks by Negative Zone, anti-zealots in Cape Verde, repelling an attempted incursion into Euclidean space by Shumagorath in Mogadishu, subduing a fallen former herald of Galactus, setting himself up as a new god in New Guinea. So with each major victory, the message spreads and grows in the hearts and minds of the people. So with that said, we skip over to the inside of Martillo's mind, for Cable is searching for any bit of information that could help his cause. So as he sat across from him, he let him know that he was there when they first crawled out of their hiding hole. And yeah, he noticed they got themselves some new clothes and new names, but see, Cable is also aware that despite them changing their appearances, they are still the same people dead set on conquering the world. So with that out there, Martillo responded by saying he cannot be judged for that, for it was 1,000,000 years and 1,000 lifetimes ago. In which Cable replies by saying, not to us. So with the introductions out of the way, Cable then goes on to ask him about the message, for he already knows it's some kind of semiotic virus. But what he doesn't know is what exactly it does. In which Martillo tells him it's better not to question the message and better just to accept it. Now while this exchange is going down, Cable is hard at work breaking down Martillo's mental defenses while trying to understand their overall plan. Because Cable then tells him that he understands that they are trying to pacify everyone, but once they are done doing what they are doing, then what's next on their agenda? So as the two continue their mental battle within Martillo's mind, Martillo tells Cable that he empathizes with him and in a sense they are on the same side and wanted the same things. Because he knows that Cable wanted to build a future for himself, but it was taken. But one thing Cable failed to realize was the future from Martillo's perspective was never theirs. Martillo then goes on to say 50 of the children could eliminate the human race in a single day. Now many of his people wanted to do it and be done with it. But some of them believe they have evolved past all that. For the message is the better way. So while all of that is going down, we transfer to Bishop making his way to the mansion kind of like Kate in the previous issues. Now just like her, his goal is to collect something hidden there in case of an emergency. Now, for Bishop, the mansion is both home and hallowed ground. As a boy in the camp, it represented the dream of a better world, and as a man out of time, it was the place you fought for that dream, so it's painful for him to see the place like this. Understanding the cultural significance of Xavier School, Orchis had chosen to occupy it, in hopes of sweeping up any mutants struggling in search of sanctuary. Now the reason why Bishop is here is because Cable hid a massive weapons cache below the old basketball court. Which means Bishop will have to avoid the guards and dozens of overlapping surveillance systems to reach it. Now, these high-tech systems all fundamentally work the same way. They send out energy fields that is sensitive to movement and mass and interrupt disruptions in those fields. So all Bishop has to do is absorb those energy fields. Now the trick is where skill and experience come into play, because he has to know which wavelengths to absorb and which to reflect. Because if he absorbs too much light, then he will become a walking black hole, which is sure to be noticed, and if he absorbs too little, then he'll be as obvious as if you walked in through the front door. So with that said, Bishop feels the fields gently scraping his skin as he walks through the grounds. So as he navigates his way to his target, he has to mentally calculate thousands of fractured angles, and while he's doing that, he has to make sure he reflects, absorbs, metabolizes, and radiates a riot of invisible light all at the same time. It is a dance that only Bishop can appreciate, because at various points, billion-dollar instruments mistake him for a shrub, squirrel, a chair, and an internal error. So with that said, Bishop has found what he needed. Following that, we skip over to the United Nations, and when we get there, we see that the government of the world has accepted the children of tomorrow and sanctioned them to act as they see fit. So with diplomatic immunity, they are able to continue to spread their message to all corners of the world. And as for their base of operations, it is officially recognized as a sovereign entity. So with the world singing their praises, we skip over to Serafina and the captain. And the captain states that the world is so much smaller than he thought it would be and is confused on how they could have been born from them. For he believes that the world is a soup of weakness, ignorance, and people in need. In which Serafina completely disagrees with him, for she sees them as precious little things, kind of like an ancient vase, useless, beautiful, and broken. Now just to add some context to the story, Serafina and Captain have debated for a very long time, so much so that it has continued over generations across cycles of death, evolution, and rebirth. Now both of them represent opposing evolutionary ideologies. So when it came to the message with all its implications, that was from Serafina's camp. For her party argued for the children to come to humanity as heroes, which represents the new way. And as for Captain, he is more of a traditionalist, who would prefer to grind humanity beneath his heel, eradicate every trace of them, and start the world anew if he had his way. So with that said, in the center of their city, both of them would debate each other while surrounded by their fellow citizen. It was basically ideological combat, and in the end, Serafina's ideological stance was successful. So with her victory, she became the voice of the city, and with that title, she was now given the advantage. Now when it comes to the children, they indeed created the city, but at the same time, the city also created the children. So to the children, the city serves as their mother, god, servant, and slave. So as all that plays out, an alarm goes off with an incoming omnipathic communication, speaking of pain, distress, imprisonment, and torture. And almost instantly, Serafina was positive the person in need was Martillo. But see, knowing he is in trouble is different from knowing who had him. Because very few people could hold one of them against their will. So with them retracing his thoughts, it was only a matter of minutes before his location was known. So as they wait for the location to come in, Captain is super excited that he may have a chance to kill one of the superheroes. So with that said, he then goes on to tell Serafina that she can't help these people if they don't want to be elevated. So with the children of tomorrow en route, we switch back over to Cable's interrogation of Martillo. And when we get there, Martillo tells Cable that the message is not a virus, it is only an idea, one so clear and so self-evidently true that it transformed first their mind and then their body. Now those who survive will think and feel and fly as we do. And they will become true children at the genetic level. Now the rest who can't change or won't, there will be no place for them in the new world. So with that shocking news, Cable asks how many people are projected to make it into the future. In which Martillo responded by saying less than 1% of humanity will survive the change. So with the children's plan to completely wipe out the human race out in the open, Martillo continues to tell Cable that the mutant projected the human race would be gone in 20 years, but we know that they will be gone in 6 months. And there was nothing anyone could do to stop it, for they had prepared since they escaped the mutants' dream prison 200 years ago. For within those 200 years, they sharpened their knives and raised their hammers because there was no way to stop them because they are the future. So with that said, Cable responds by saying he is from the future and he never saw him anywhere in it. And just like that, Cable finished his psychic assault just as reinforcements arrived. So as Martillo says things are over for him, Cable replies by saying, "Finished, you didn't think I'd actually be there in person, did you? I could catch something." So with that remark, Cable then goes on to tell him to check under his seat before the hologram fades into nothingness. And that is when we discover Martillo was sitting upon a bomb. And just like that, a massive explosion went off, destroying everything in the surrounding area and mostly anyone who made it too close to the safe house. So with Cable outmaneuvering the children of tomorrow, we pick up with him and Bishop loaded to the teeth with weapons ready to put in work. For their next stop is the city itself. So with that massive info dump, issue number 2 of the Children of the Vault comes to an end, which leads us to issue number 3. And that issue opens with Bishop and Cable aiming a massive singularity cannon at the children's floating city. And once it was in range, the two had no problem pulling the trigger, firing said singularity at point-blank range. Now, when it came to the singularity itself, it was only 3 seconds before the first microsingularity hit, so almost instantly, the city mind picked up on a small energy spike below its southern border, so in less than a second, Pharaoh, Adamo, and Capitan were dispatched to investigate. 0.5 seconds before the first microsingularity hits, time mysteriously slows to a crawl, and a sudden heavy night falls over the city. So with impact imminent, 0.1 picoseconds after the first microsingularity hit, Pharaoh had somehow managed to catch said attack and seal the singularity in a gravity Klein bottle, and instantly the night lifted. But during the quick moment, Cable and Bishop were able to eliminate 83 children and 12 city blocks all in a blink of an eye. So with the bell rung and the battle on, Bishop and Cable hopped into an armored vehicle and charged the children's base, but not before setting the massive weapon of destruction on auto fire. So with no time to waste, the two mutants used the additional shots as cover fire as they approached the city. Now, Prisa used her superheat to heat up the time around the black hole until it eventually began to evaporate it. And as for the fourth and fifth singularity, Alvido consumed it and made it just another part of the pocket universe in his small intestine. And as for their sixth and final blast, it never went off, because Adamo made sure to stop it before it was fired. So with the cannon dealt with, we jumped forward to Capitan making short work of the mutant's vehicle upon entering the city limits. So with our heroes standing face to face with yet another powerhouse, Capitan asked what could two mutants do against 1 million children? Which in all fairness, was a good question, because against power like the children possess, the battle would have been short-lived if they were in this alone. But they weren't, because in a massive twist, an army of sentinels rained down from above. Both older and newer models were deployed against their once saviors. So as the sentinels filled the skies, Capitan watched in shock as they were caught off guard. So with the city under attack, Capitan quickly turned his attention toward the Orchis soldiers before him. Now, just to give you some context about what is going on, 3 hours earlier on board the Reforge, Orchis photospheric headquarters, Cable did a little psychic espionage. In fact, it didn't really take much to get Orchis to go to war. Because after a few slight pushes, Orchis was ready to go. Because the night before, Cable placed a carefully designed paranoia, along with a few hints about what to look for, in the mind of a mid-level Orchis scientist while he slept. And once the brain defect was discovered, all hell broke loose. And from that point on, all decision-making power is given over to giant senseless brains in vats and quantum strategy engines surrounded by 5 feet of shielding on all sides. And after 23 seconds of intense analysis and calculations, the system concludes that the city and its children are the primary threat to Orchis's goals and that every resource should be immediately mobilized for a frontal assault. So from their headquarters on the surface of the sun, Orchis sends down soul hammer strikes, each with yattatons of destructive force. But see, the city mind quickly retaliated with a counter of its own, because it deployed its impregnable force fields batteries and deflector shields, which rose like flocks of birds. And as for what the city couldn't deflect, children like Luz and Alvido absorbed the remaining blast themselves. Next, Orchis used untouched AIs that was trained with 10 million years worth of intergalactic war strategies, and with that data, Orchis was able to coordinate their main forces, which was made up of an army of Stark and classic Mark VI Sentinels. So with the battle in full swing, Capitan was completely down with fighting against the humans, because from the very start, he was in line with wiping them all out. So as he fought, he told Serafina to look at what she wanted to save, because he believed her noble savages meant to kill them all. Now this was something Serafina couldn't understand, because from her point of view, the message should have worked. Now, this was something Capitan completely agreed with, because he stated of course it should, under any normal circumstances work, but the only problem is that the ungrateful beasts don't know what's good for them. And because of that, Capitan goes on to say, see what your new way of thinking leads to, for it was always going to come to this, because there is no reasoning with humans. Because eventually, they turn everything they touch into a fight. And with that said, Capitan hoped that he would at least face a genuine superhero, but these were only cheap mass-produced reproductions, which disappointed them. But despite how much Capitan tried to turn Serafina to his side of the argument, she refused to agree with what he was saying, to the point where she was lost of words. And to make Serafina's situation worse, her ability to control machines for some reason refused to work because something was protecting them. So as the fight carried on, we jumped over to Bishop and Cable doing what they do best. And on a side note, I found it funny that the two mutants were debating weapon choices while fighting the children of tomorrow. But anyway, for all intensive purposes, the two mutants seem to have found common ground in their love of warfare. And on the next page, we see Bishop come face to face with a child of the vault with a sword in his hand. Now this guy gives a crazy speech that had me looking forward to his battle, because he stated that the blade he had was the function of his will, and its edge was honed to 2 dimensions. And with one blow, he could split an atom, slice through space and time, and even separate a strand of DNA. But when push came to shove, Cable was able to level him with a single shot. So with Bishop back on his feet, the two proceed to make their way to a certain point, because moving forward they would have to split up to accomplish their goals. So with the two preparing to go their separate ways, Cable informs Bishop that he has implanted a map of the city within his head to help with the operation, because against his better judgment, Cable was counting on him. So following that, we transition over to Serafina flying overhead, trying to get a feel for what was going on. Because she states that she could sense forces unaccounted for acting on events, so because of that, she switched to oversight to better assess the situation. Now Serafina was able to see through time and across space and into hearts, and because of that, she could see Capitan smile for the first time in 8 incarnations, for he was excited to fight all the world had to offer, from their superheroes to their gods. Because in the grand scheme of things, he wanted Earth to send all it had, for he was encoded as a conqueror. But see, Capitan wasn't the only person she had seen, for she also saw the worst impulse of her own society unleashed. Because in one of the children's past incarnations, he threw an antimatter tantrum that left 81 through 101 city blocks permanently uninhabitable, which at the time was something the bulk of their society thought they had evolved beyond. But due to current events, it seems that they have prematurely acted, because murder and extinction by fire are now welcome. So with Muerte back online, we skip high above everyone on the surface of the sun, because Serafina sees something that resembles an ancient version of their city trying to orchestrating humanity's hopeless counterattacks. And finally, she sees 2 mutants, each with 1 foot in and out of time. One was bottomless and will stop at nothing, and the other she met once, in another incarnation. But his mind is an armory and his thoughts was deadly. But despite seeing those 2 mutants, Serafina still sees that they will win, because there is no way for them to lose. But then out of nowhere, Serafina sees something else. Serafina sees something beyond all of this, something behind everything. So with that view, Serafina sees an enormous exterior to space arranging events like flowers, immense intelligence thinking vast and terrible thoughts. So with that vision, Serafina comes crashing out of the sky and into the ground, because what she is seeing is a dominion, for a dominion is coming. So with a mental overload, Serafina for a minute passes out, before reclaiming consciousness. But when she awoke, she was completely panicked, so with this new insight into life, Serafina immediately took off towards the city mind. Because according to Serafina, the humans are not what they seem, and because of that she has to warn the city. For their strategies are compromised, their information is incomplete. The humans are not alone, because they are being controlled. And the thing that is doing it is wearing them like a glove, and the mind beyond comprehension forces their every move. So as she entered the room, Cable voiced response by saying he was flattered, but she was giving him too much credit, because he didn't force their every move like he had a gun to their head. So with that said, this issue of Children of the Vault comes to an end. Now with issue number 3 of the Children of the Vault coming to an end with the Dominion making its move, we transition over to the final issue of the story. And that issue kicks off with Cable holding the brain of the city hostage with a massive gun to its face. So with Cable in full control, we transition over to one of the random cities of tomorrow. And when we get there, we see a sentinel confronting one of the humans under the children's influence. Because to this child, the future has been good to him up to this point, because in recent days the future has changed him, because Rodrigo stopped feeling fear a week ago. Now he didn't do it because he wanted to, he did it because he was incapable of feeling emotion. And as a byproduct, he realized he no longer felt joy, anger, and all emotions in between. And to top everything off, he didn't even miss the past, nor did he miss anything before the children's arrival, which includes his name, village, how food tastes, and even his mother's face. So as the change starts to overcome the child, we transition over to Orchis' reforge located on the sun. Now on the surface of the sun, the reconstructed Orchis' mother mold births 1,000 sentinels an hour. For they are the main body of the Orchis attack force, with inexhaustible cavalry, artillery, and infantry all in one place. Because in the reforge, these repurchased mutant murder machines were sent to both the city and the Tomorrowtowns all over the planet. But despite how many sentinels are in circulation, the children somehow managed to destroy more than they could print. And on the bottom of the page, we get to see the children's response firsthand, as the childlike Muerte takes out a glowing crystal. And within a blink of an eye, the crystal causes the reforge to blow up in a massive explosion. So with Orchis' main printing press destroyed, we jump back over to the city, with Cable continuing his hostage situation with the city. And while that is going on, Serafina tells Cable to put his weapon down and talk to her like a civilized person. But see, Cable isn't about that, by no means, because he told her, the last time he seen her, she dropped a battleship on his head. But that is when Serafina responded by saying that wasn't her, because she evolved since then, and following that she asked about Cannonball. Because back in X-Men 1999, she broke his heart after being together for a short time. But that is where Cable responds by saying he is dead, and before that he was happily married. So with Serafina's tactics going nowhere, Cable lets her know that he liked the old her better. But Serafina fires back by saying she could say the same thing about him because he's supposed to be a mutant freedom fighter. And now he's working with the same sapiens that killed his people. But see, one thing about Cable, Serafina fails to understand about his character, is that Cable would make a deal with anyone he needs to, in order to achieve his goals even if it's the devil himself. Because from his perspective, both Orchis and the children are similar creatures. Now, at that moment, Capitan comes flying into the room and completely overpowered Cable. Because in his words, you can't overpower a city with a gun. Especially because every molecule of this city is sentient and alive. Which means Cable is completely surrounded by consciousness, with nowhere to hide. So as Capitan continues to beat the crap out of Cable, Serafina tries to break up the battle by saying she has the situation under control, because in another 10 seconds, she would have had control over Cable's arm. But that is when Capitan shouts out, "Enough, he is so tired of playing, he is so tired of the so-called human question." Because the only real question is what to do with the bodies. Because, according to Capitan, the world is promised to them. And at this point, Cable said stop crying over broken promises, because they really are acting like children. So with that out there, the Capitan replies with "It's over, Orchis is finished and the message has reached its final stage." Which means they are ahead of schedule, and the human race won't see tomorrow. So following that, we get a breakdown of how the message is affecting everyone step by step. Because we pick up with a girl who has not been able to see for almost an hour, but at the same time she can feel her eyes running down her face. For in its final stages, the message is all-consuming, all-transforming, because it is converting the human spirit into something more useful. Because the message renders the old human hierarchy meaningless, and in the end, it comes for everyone. And as for those who oppose or ignore the message, they too are implicated just as much as those who embrace it. Because at the end of the day, the message is the ultimate argument. And what comes after will be beyond even that. So when Luz flies over one of the cities, she thinks to herself that things will be over soon. So with recklessness, she shifts to coherent light as the world slows to a brilliant crawl. In this form, she cannot imagine the darkness, because everywhere she looks all she sees is light. So she allows the human sluggish projections to pass harmlessly through her, and as her glow dives deep into the dark pools of their eyes, their optic nerves burn up. And as for the people, all 12 of their brains turn to ash before they could process the sight of her. Once, generations ago, she would have sympathized with them as they fought for their lives. She might have even helped them. But see, that fearless girl who wanted to be free is gone. So, as Capitan continued to choke out Cable, Serafina let him know that the only thing he managed to accomplish was to make everything more painful for them. Because the message was their gift to humanity, the gift of elevation, and the gift of peace. But at that moment was when Bishop walked in the room and blasted Capitan off of Cable and said, "You people can keep your gifts, because all I see is you all talking about your new ideas." But all he has been seeing is the children handing out the same smallpox blankets in a new package. So Capitan, completely pissed off, he asked, "Why is it so hard for them to understand that we are the future?" Because from his perspective, 2 lonely mutants cannot fight the future. which he is sadly mistaken, because that is what Bishop and Cable is known for doing. So with irritation at an all-time high, Capitan tells them they are only delaying the inevitable, in which Cable responds by saying more like stalling for time. But Cable had a trick up his sleeve, because out of nowhere the city started to go haywire. And right when that happens, we get a dialogue talking about one of the children of the vault. Because alone among the children, Diamante, the living memory, has no number, because each time he is reborn, he remains essentially unchanged, as a fixed observer standing outside of events. Now this makes him the ultimate historian, the future's past personified. 100,000 years of knowledge flowed through his crystal veins, so he is shocked to find, for the first time in his life, something new in his perfect body. So as he examined the flaws, it grew. It grew and grew until eventually, it consumed centuries of knowledge in seconds. So because he is Diamante, the historian, even as he is devoured by the flaw, his crystal brain consumed by horror, still carefully recorded every detail of the experience. For the flaw that consumed Diamante was the phalanx. So with the city infected, Cable states that 1,000 years in the future, there's a quiet little timeline where everything is the phalanx and the phalanx is everything. And as a younger, less cautious man, Cable risked assimilation to get a sample of the superstrain of techno-organic virus used to convert that universe, because he thought it might come in handy someday. Now that is why Cable always insisted on being brought back from the dead with his virus. And just to make sure he maintained his secret weapon, he kept a secret cache under the mansion. And on a side note, that was what Bishop was picking up in a previous issue. But anyway, that is when Cable brings up how every molecule of the city is one big brain, which means every inch of it is a potential exposure site. So while Cable was making his way to the heart of the city, he made sure to spread the virus all over the place. And the way he was able to do it was by using his massive weapon, because the weapon he had was not a gun but a syringe. So once he was said and done, Cable told Serafina to think of it as a gift. A piece for it already had corrupted the core AI and converted 10% of the city to technical organic matter. And at this rate, the entire city and everything, and it will be in a vertical route converted in 24 hours. And the crazy part about this whole thing is, this is just the early symptoms, which is basically a walk in the park and compared to what comes next. Because once the virus converts enough material into technology organic matter, it will become a Babel spiral and send a signal to the Technarch, which is a cannibal world that feeds on solar systems. So if the children thought fighting a city was hard, imagine fighting a predator planet. So with the information out there, Serafin let them know that this would not give Cable nor Bishop the victory because the city already has the virus in their database, which means shortly the city will start fighting back against the infection. Now, at that point, the children believed they had Cable and Bishop both in check. But that was when Cable asked Bishop about how his mission went, which Bishop said it was an accomplishment. Because just to add context to that statement, Bishop went into the nursery, and while there, he was able to set a whole bunch of bombs all around the nursery that is designed to destroy the next generation's entire genetic library. Which means if the virus doesn't kill them all, then the giant mushroom cloud coming from their birthing chambers would. So with that revelation, this causes Serafina to tell Bishop she believes he's bluffing because a mutant like him would never kill a whole bunch of babies. But that was when Bishop tells her that he wished he was the kind of person not to kill a child. But if you ever read any Bishop comic books in the late 90s, you realize he is completely down for trying to do what needs to be done to accomplish his goals. So with both sides at a standstill, Cable tells him that his people are all dead, and the humans are responsible the way he sees it. So from Cable's point of view, everyone will get what they deserve, and as for him and Bishop, they can just start over in another timeline. Because at the end of the day, the Capitan is correct. The X-Men would never do something like this, but to the best of their knowledge, the X-Men were pushed into the meat grinder. So to be honest, there are no more X-Men, they're just two old soldiers with not much to lose. So maybe you're right, maybe we are bluffing, but could you really risk it given their history? So with Bishop and Cable having the children and checkmate, they were forced to submit to their terms, which was packing up their entire city and returning to the vault. Now with the voice of the city, Serafina, defeated, she spoke on behalf of the city and issued their surrender. So with the message self-destructing, all who consumed the truth is reduced to empty catchphrases. Once potent symbols are torn down and forgotten, because now tomorrow will never come and something else would rush in to take his place. So in the end, both sides laid down their arms and collected their dead. And before they left, Serafina states that Capitan was right because he always said that she was too gentle and magnanimous in this incarnation. And because of that, she suspects that she won't be in the future. Because to her, they could have saved them from whatever is coming, because she's seen it and she was afraid. So with that problem solved, and another problem coming, the children take their city and fold it like an old map and return to the vault. And following that, it did not take long for everything that was risen to quickly fall apart. For some, like Orchis, the nightmare was over and they stole credit for the victory. But for others, the rapid breakdown of the so-called Tomorrowtowns continued to confuse scientists and stretch international aid services to the limits. Only weeks ago, it was discovered that the unstable elements used to construct the futuristic metropolises are rapidly degrading into poisons. Which means the fallen cities are leaving millions of people trapped in collapsing poisonous cities with nowhere to turn. So with the children defeated, issue number 4 of Children of the Vault comes to an end. And let me just say that this story was surprisingly good. Now don't get me wrong, it could have been better given how powerful the children are. But at the same time, this story was able to pull off a convincing victory and really flex how deadly Bishop and Cable could be. Because when I first heard this story was coming out, I thought it would be an event like Judgment Day, but instead we got a mini 4-issue run. But see, this goes to show that a good writer could make a compelling story with limited pages. But anyway, I love how this comic series brought back up the Dominion after hearing nothing about it in a while. And as for the aftermath, despite Orchis' approval rating rising, their military capabilities were dramatically cut down with the Forge destroyed. And as for the children, I don't think they are gone forever, because they volunteered to go back into the vault to protect their future, which means after they evolve a little more, they will be ready for round 2. Now with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.